What really happens when you're under contract? Welcome to episode 3 of our podcast, of our home buying series. And today we will be covering what really happens when you go under contract. So today we have with us again, Melody Ochoa.
Hi, great. How are you, Jorge?
I'm doing good. So I want to talk to you today about what happens when you actually go under contract. Episode 1 was about getting prepared or getting pre-approved. Getting prepared, episode 1. Getting pre-approved was episode 2. And today we're going to talk about what really happens when you're under contracts. So people think that once the offer is accepted, everything's pretty much done and we're going to be good to go. Is that the case?
It is not. This is actually when the real work starts. So let me tell you a little bit about what happens when you actually are under contract. So once we receive a contract, the first step is, after of course congratulating everybody, is reviewing the contract from top to bottom, making sure we're taking notes of important dates, we're taking notes of how they structured their offer, if there's going to be any credits involved, who's going to be paying what, and then
option periods and all that.
Yes. So we're taking note important dates and deadlines, making sure that we make note of that, because one wrong move can set the whole file back. So it's important to really know the contract and understand what terms were offered. Then we're going to set up the loan in a way to match the contract, set up all the numbers. And then we're also going to get with the title company and we're going to order what's called a prelim CD, or preliminary disclosure, which is going to be close to what you're going to be signing the day of closing, with the breakdown of title fees and all the fees that go into the transaction. That way we can review those numbers with you guys and make sure that they agree and everything seems good and the buyer's still feeling confident and understands the numbers.
Okay, well, explain to us, we're going to start with the option period and option fees. Can you explain to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So when you are negotiating, your offer is accepted, you're going to give a deposit per se, which is called the earnest money. It's typically 1% of that sales price, and then that comes with an option period. What that option period is essentially time for you to do your homework, inspect the home, see how that goes, make sure everything is as it should be, and you have time to negotiate any terms. So those generally run about a week. Some are shorter, some are a little bit longer, but you are allowed to back out of that contract if anything is wrong with the home, if anything comes up that you're not feeling so good about, without having to lose out on that initial deposit. So you are able to get that money back within that time frame.
Your earnest money. Now, for example, we would come up with contingencies for inspections if anything comes up. What else?
A lot of it has to do with the negotiations, that anything that can come up on the inspection, if the roof needs repair, if there's paint that's chipping and the buyer doesn't like that, they can still negotiate, hey, paint this, or take care of this, or let's remove this. And so really it's a period of negotiation between buyer and seller.
That's where I start negotiating for my client.
Exactly.
And the seller's agent for his client.
Yes.
So we do repairs, concessions. Is it better for the seller to do the repairs? Is it better for the buyer to take care of it? Just, give us some concessions or negotiate the price, and that way we can take in consideration the cost of repairing the roof, for example, and then deduct that, or what do you see the most?
It really depends on both the buyer and the seller and what they're willing to do. So if, let's say, someone wants the door replaced, the buyer saying there's a crack in the door, I don't like it, fix it or replace it. The seller can choose to replace it themselves if that's something within their means. If they don't have the time to, then maybe they'll shoot at you. You know what? I'll give you the money. You take care of it, and that's where the seller concessions come in. So really, it just depends on both parties and what they'd prefer. And a lot of the times, it is that back and forth. Well, do you want me to replace it or do you want the money? And that's where they start negotiating those terms.
Okay. And how does those repairs, or how do they affect the financing?
Absolutely, it can.
Really?
It depends on the extent of the repairs. If the whole roof is needing to be replaced, it can push back closing depending on your timelines. So it depends on what is needing to be done and what your timeline is on the contract, because that all ties together.
Like something major, like a foundation.
Exactly.
We see a lot of foundation issues here in Texas.
Unfortunately.
Does that set the financing back, or?
It definitely can. It definitely can. It's also gonna depend on how the appraisal comes back, which we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in just a second. But if the foundation just needs a little touch up, a little work, but it'll still appraise, and the appraisal doesn't, or the appraiser doesn't say it's a real issue that needs to be done because it's a bigger underlying problem, then it might not set back anything. It might be something that can be negotiated. They could give the seller credit so that the buyer can take care of after they move in. But if it's a bigger issue, then yes, of course, sometimes it could either delay or completely stop the
funding.
Exactly.
So what happens if you start mentioning a little bit about appraisal? What happens if the price changes? Let's say, for example, just recently I had a house. We made an offer for $290,000. We went under contract and we were waiting for the appraisal. I was pretty nervous, to be honest with you. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a little bit less. It came in at $294,000, so we were good to go. But what happens if the price changes? How does that affect the financing?
So it really depends on the loan itself, but a lot of the times, for example, if the home weren't to appraise for the sales price, then you have to go back to the seller and start those negotiations again. Are they willing to drop the price, or are they willing to give concessions to make up the difference, to help out with that piece of it, because we can only lend up to the amount that the appraisal comes back at. So it really can affect the loan because it's restructuring the numbers. But a lot of the times, for the most part, the homes you hope appraise at that amount, and it's not too often that they don't appraise, but it does happen, and it does happen still a lot. But it's not something that people should be nervous about, because generally when they're listing homes, they are looking at those numbers, they are looking at those comparisons, and hopefully that's not the case.
So if it falls short, I'm just thinking here, if it falls short, well, pretty much the seller would kind of have to go down to reflect that price, right? Because even if he stays, let's say, on my example, if the house came in at $280,000 and he's selling for $290,000 and he doesn't want to go down, I mean, it's going to stay on the market, right?
Exactly.
Unless he comes down.
Exactly.
And then,
or someone's willing to pay
if they really like the
overvalue.
house,
Yeah.
then they pay the difference, and then you guys finance
Exactly.
the amount. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And during this whole time, what is underwriting doing? Are they working on something during this time, or do they wait for everything to come in and then they do like a final check? What goes on with underwriting?
So while you're in the option period, generally we're preparing everything. We're preparing your file. We're getting everything ready. We're gathering documents. If we need updated documents from you, we're doing all the upfront work, making sure everything's good before submitting to underwriting. Now, once the option period ends, that's when we go ahead and order the appraisal. We've already discussed numbers. You've already signed your loan estimate, which is the document that is basically saying, okay, I accept these terms and I'm ready to move forward. So we'll go ahead and order the appraisal and we'll get your file submitted into underwriting. During that process, while the appraisal is happening in the background, any other negotiations or maybe repairs, while all of that's taking place, the underwriters are preparing your file again for that final approval. So they're reviewing income, they're reviewing your bank statements, making sure there's no large deposits, making sure you didn't go purchase a car. So they're going to recheck your credit. They're basically going to make sure that the story on paper is really what's happening.
So you used to recommend that the client stays away from doing any major purchases, any major financing.
Please.
even if they're under contract.
Yes.
A lot of times people say, well, we're under contract already. I'm already approved. That's it. I'm going to get the house in next month, so I'll just start, buying my new car here the next couple of weeks. But it's not a good idea, right?
That's the worst idea, because right now is the most important time to not make any major changes to credit. Don't make any major changes to your job situation. Don't make any major changes that could potentially break the deal.
And how long does this usually take from the time you go under contract to the time you close?
Really, it depends on when the file is closing, but I'd say anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. And underwriting, they will provide what's called a conditional approval. Once it's in underwriting, they'll give you that initial approval, and they let you know, they list out, this is exactly what I need from you to give you what's called that clear to close, which is that final approval that we're seeking. So between the conditional approval and the final approval, we're working with our borrower to make sure we get everything in as soon as possible, because the sooner we get everything in, the sooner we get that final approval.
Okay, and so what about the title, title phase? When does that come in? How do we ensure like a smooth title transfer from seller to buyer?
So that's all happening in the background as well. When we receive the contract, as part of us prepping your file for underwriting, we're ordering all those documents or requesting them from the title company that was selected. And during that time, they're preparing those documents, and we're organizing everything. So they're taking care of that closing disclosure, the tax if there's an existing survey or if one needs to be ordered. They're handling all of that, and so we're in constant communication with the title company throughout that process, making sure we get all of those items in by the time the file's ready to submit for final.
That clear to close.
That clear to close.
That clear to close.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. And now explain closing disclosure and final walkthroughs.
Mm-hmm. So the closing disclosure, typically you get after, or closer to, not necessarily after final approval. There is instances where you can get that closing disclosure. Typically, once we're getting closer to that closing date, that's when we begin to balance out those numbers with title, because title has their fees and then the lender's going to have their fees as well. And so we'll be communicating back and forth, and in lending terms, we call that balancing the CD. We'll spit out a closing disclosure with those numbers, and title will send it back until we have reached an agreement that all the numbers are as they should be, everything matches. And once we have that, that's when we say, okay, it's approved, everything looks great, we can send that to the borrower. And this does need to be done typically 3 days before, 3 business days before the closing date, because you have to sign that 3 days before the closing
It's like the
date.
final numbers that the client's going to see and know. Or
That's what they're signing. Mm-hmm.
Do they change? It's 3 days before, but can they change, by the closing date?
They're not supposed to, and that's why they give you those 3 days to sign off and say you agree. If they were to change, that sets back those 3 days. So you cannot close if anything changes between the initial signature and the closing date, those 3-day period.
What are some of the things that usually happen for it to get delayed?
Like as far as?
Yeah, let's say we're supposed to close on the 25th, and for some reason we don't have the final disclosure, and then so it's push back, 3 more days?
With the numbers, if it's anything on the title side, a lot of the times things that can push back closing are if a survey isn't completed yet, if there's any issues on taxes, any liens that are still waiting to be cleared. Now, if it's more on that there's instances where you still don't have a final approval, but you have a CD that's finalized. But we can't get that final approval because maybe there's 1 or 2 items that we're still waiting on from the borrower. So that can potentially push everything back because it does take some time to get everything back into underwriting, reviewed, to still get that final approval.
Okay. What about any tips on wire instructions, or what do you recommend? There is a lot of fraud going on right now. So what are your recommendations to protect our clients for that?
So generally, most title companies have a secure way of sending those wire instructions directly to you. That's the preferred method because it's the fastest way to get your funds where they need to be. And make sure that when you arrive at the title company the day of closing, everything's ready to go. You don't have to worry about anything. Hopefully they already have the funds. So you just sign, and hopefully if the seller's already signed, then you can maybe even get the keys the same day.
So you recommend doing the wire a day before?
If you can, yes. The sooner the better. That way title can do what they need to do, get everything in the system, and they show that they have those funds ready to go, and it just makes everything so much smoother.
Okay, so but always double check the wire.
Always double check.
And wire information.
Yes, if you're getting wiring instructions from anyone other than your title company, I probably would not trust those.
Correct. All right, now explain real quickly before we close the closing day. Signing documents and getting the keys. Can you go a little bit over that?
Yeah, so this is the real exciting part. Once when you have your scheduled closing date, a lot of lenders now have moved to what's called a hybrid closing. So back then, you would have to sign a packet this big of documents, and I mean you're leaving that closing sore from all the signatures. But now the good thing is everything's gone to more of an electronic feel. So the day of closing, you might have to sign a couple of documents electronically before going to the title company. When you arrive at the title company, hopefully they already have the funds wired in. If not, if you didn't have a chance to, or if you prefer, a lot of title companies will also accept a cashier's check. So that is another option. If you are really feeling a little nervous about sending wires, you can take your check with you to the title company. Once you're there, they will go over all of the documents basically in your disclosures that you signed with the lender. They're going to go over page by page everything that you're signing. They're going to go over the numbers, and they're going to break everything down for you. That way you know exactly what you're signing, and you're going to sign your life away until the very last document. And then usually after that, again, if the seller has already signed their portion and your lender table funds like us, then that means a smoother, faster process, so you get your keys then and there.
I really do appreciate it, Melody. Thank you for your time again. It's always a pleasure having you here. So remember, friends, if you're thinking about buying or selling, you can give me a call, 214-640-0035. And if you need a lender, make sure you reach out to Melody. Melody, contact information?
Yes. You guys can reach me at 214-400-8440, and I'd be more than happy to help walk you guys through the process.
And remember, if you have the right team, the whole process should be smooth and easy to go through if you have the right team. If you have any questions, you're planning on buying or selling in the next 6 to 12 months, go ahead and give me a call. And if you're not yet following us, go ahead and follow us here, 214-640-0035. Thank you.